So getting from capitalism to communism, that's the reason for the Cold War. That's the reason today that people fight. It's this ugly process of taking from not just the super wealthy, but even if you want to think of the super wealthy, is it okay to murder a millionaire so that other people are doing better? Probably not. Probably not, because once they become, who's next? That's always the slippery slope of, if we're going to take his individual rights away, well, how are you any different? If we're willing to take rights away from anyone, then who's next? And you might be next. Satellite nations. So the Soviet Union spread its idea. During World War II, you know that the Nazis moved in, and then eventually the Nazis get kicked out. As the Soviet Union pushes the Nazis out, they then will occupy these nations, and these nations then will basically be forced to take on communism, to take on totalitarian beliefs. Now, Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union during this time, will say, no, self-determination, we'll let them choose. Yeah, right. They didn't get to choose. Those nations become communist. They become autocratic societies. They are not democracies. They are not capitalists. These are the satellite nations here of the Soviet Union. They might as well be the Soviet Union. So America sees this. Our president, Harry Truman, sees this and says, hey, look, we've got to stop this. We've got to stop the spread of communism and totalitarianism. We need a policy of containment. The Truman Doctrine, this document will explain containment, the policy of we've got to stop the spread of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union's ideas, and this will pretty much launch from 1945 to 1990, which is the Cold War, post-World War II. Democracy versus totalitarianism, capitalism versus communism. Democracy, let's look from the democracy perspective. Remember, democracy, people will elect leaders to serve the people. We'll save that conversation for another day, but we clearly can understand that totalitarianism or an autocracy is where the government picks the government and the government bosses the people around. We don't want this. We would prefer this. One of the examples of when you have democracies around the nation where the people are making decisions and the people are electing the leaders and the leaders make decisions based on what the people want, you tend to have peace because it's the people. The people fight the wars, and often the people say, no, we don't want to go to war. How about we work things out? And they tell their leaders that, and the leaders, because they serve the people, do what the people want. And for the most part, in theory, you're going to have less wars when you have democracy, because democracies, in theory, represent the people. People don't like to die. Whereas totalitarian regimes are not run by the people. The leaders run the government, and the leaders do what they want. And guess what? The leaders aren't on the front lines dodging bullets whizzing past their heads. And so they are more likely throughout history and into the future to fight wars. So we tend to favor democracy. We say, look, if we can make sure that the world is democratic and that the world's governments are represented by individual rights and people voting and people being treated equally under a democracy, we're less likely to have wars. Whereas if we have a brutal dictator making decisions and not actually having to fight the wars, then you're going to have more wars. So Cold War, we, America, are trying to prevent totalitarianism, which is necessary. Remember, it's not necessarily like the Soviet Union wants to be dictators everywhere, even though they kind of do. But this is necessary to get to socialism, to get to communism. You can't just wave a magic wand, poof, hey, everyone's going to be equal. No, you have to force it. You have to go into a nation, you have to rewrite the rules, and at gunpoint, you have to force people to give up the stuff to make things equal. So totalitarianism, to an extent, to a degree, is necessary to get to socialism, to get to communism. Remember, who makes stuff? Why do they make it? Who buys it? Why doesn't the U.S. like communism? Here's another quick example of why the U.S. might not like communism. We can sell goods to other nations. That is awesome for us, and that brings in money. We sell goods to China. That brings in the money to America. That means more jobs. We can sell goods to South America. That brings in money to America. That means more goods. Well, if these nations turn into communist nations, then they're no longer going to buy our stuff. They're going to buy stuff from their own nation where they support their own economic beliefs of a more equal process, and that takes away possible consumers. That takes away possible markets, and that will drain money from America. That's one of the smaller side notes. It's more of a corporate capitalistic view of why we would be against communism. It leads to less growth, but it's definitely something you need to think about. Again, let's go back to the big idea of getting from capitalism to communism. One of the real reasons why we in America, it's the process. We don't necessarily disagree that we want things to be more equal. We would love for the poor not to be poor, and we love for the wealthy not to be super wealthy, although that doesn't really matter, but we don't want to see anyone struggling. So the idea of making things a little more equal economically, in which we do, we have all kinds of social welfare programs from Medicaid to Medicare to SNAP to free public school, and you name it. We have all kinds of different programs where we've lifted. These are all tend to be public goods / almost socialism, where we try to help people out. But the process of going to total communism, this is terrifying, and none of us agree with this. So the exaggerated version of, we're just taking money from the super wealthy and we're giving it to everybody else. And we already do that. It's called taxes for the most part. But this idea, again, most people are like, that's not so bad. But the reality is we're not necessarily just taking from the rich, but also we are taking his rights away. Whether you like rich people, whether you like LeBron James or not, you should agree that he has rights and he should be treated equally by the government from you. Whether you like Tom Brady, whether you like LeBron James, whether you like, you name your famous Kanye West, or whether you like Elon Musk, or whether you like Bill Gates, whether you like them or not, whether you think they have too much money and that means that you have the right to hate them, whether you think you're jealous or you feel like it's okay to be filled with resentment. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That's not this conversation. The point is, we in America have rights. And if you think that your rights should be protected by the government, then every citizen, no matter how much money's in their pocket, whether they're rich or whether they're poor and on drugs, they still have rights and the government should not abuse them. And so by taking their property and rights away, we're taking rights away. And if we take it away from LeBron James today, then who will be next? If he's not safe, then how do you know you're safe? That's one of the problems. Let's go even further. Again, we have this exaggerated version in our mind that we're just stealing from the wealthy. That's not what will happen if we make this switch. This is not what happened when we have seen other nations make this switch. There's not enough super wealthy people to steal from to even things out. That's not the way it works. Often it's regular people. We look at the example of the kulaks, who were just farmers. The farmers, like, wait a second, no. When we go to communism, we're stealing from LeBron James, and we're stealing from Tom Brady, and we're stealing from the rich businessmen. I've seen this. I know all about it. I read the textbook. No, we're stealing from regular people to give to less wealthy people. And the kulaks, this is an example. It's literally an example of what happened. The farmers, their money was taken from them. More importantly, it was their farm was taken from them. But the government comes in and says, we've got to equal things out. The Soviet Union goes into the Ukraine and says, we got to make things equal, right? We got to make things equal. Sharing is caring. Well, you have to do it by force. So to make things equal, you have to take things from the people that have something, give it to the people that don't. And so the people that had something were the farmers. And so we will take from them, or the Soviet Union went in and took from them. And rightfully so, the farmers said, no, we're not doing this. I've worked my whole life. I worked from sun up to sundown, 365 days a year. I'm not rich. I'm not wealthy. Everything that I have, I've earned. I'm just a farmer. Yeah, well, the Soviet Union, the communists say, well, you have more than someone else, and you can't have more than someone else. That's not communism, so we've got to take it from you. And if you say no, we'll just kill you. And then we'll take your farm, and we'll give it to someone else. And then they say, well, we don't know how to farm. Maybe you should let the kulaks keep farming. Or let's point this way. That way, let them keep farming. They know how to farm. They're feeding us. Don't kill them. I don't know how to farm. Well, guess what? When you leave these people in charge of farming, you have some problems. From 1929 to 1933, this is where the joke ends. 5 million people may have died. Now, I'm not saying, well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. No, we're just saying the numbers. It could be as many as 5 million. It could be 1 million, 2 million died from hunger, disease, and mass executions. That's what happens when you have a totalitarian government trying to equal things out. These are facts. This is what's happened. This is the history of communism. This is the history of socialism. This is the history of going from a mixed economy to an economy where we share everything. There's no magic wand. There's no poof. We're all equal. There is a poof, as in a gun, killing people, murdering them, digging mass graves. And now that there's less people, we make things equal. That is how it happens. 6 million people die. This is it. Communism and socialism. The government is essentially planning the economy. Do you want the government running farms? Do you want the government to be in charge of? Do they know how to do that? How much does the government actually know how to do? We've seen the government struggle in your lifetime. How many things has the government messed up during your life? Do you want them running food? Or do you think it possible, yeah, you know what, they can't really do anything. If they run food, maybe we'll all starve to death. Do you want the government running video games? Because guess what? If the government is in charge of centrally planning video games, the first thing they'll probably decide is video games are not important. We're not making them anymore. Why are we making so many stupid pairs of tennis shoes? We only need one pair of tennis shoes. That's not an exaggeration, folks. That's exactly what will happen in a communist socialist society. The government plans the economy and the government decides, what do we really need to do and what is just something that's fun. We're going to do the things that are a necessity. Food is important, specific food. Video games, shoes, those aren't important. Shut those factories down. Turn those factories back into something that's more important, like making guns and military equipment. That's exactly what happens. The government aren't farmers. They don't know what they're doing. The government can't play video games. The government can't do any of these things. That's socialism. That's communism. Domino theory is the idea that once one nation goes communist, then it's going to spread to the other geographically close nations. If Vietnam becomes a communist nation, then Laos, which is nearby, which Cambodia, which is nearby Laos, which Thailand. So once one nation falls to communism and subscribes to these totalitarian communist ideas, then it's going to spread to these other countries. So we've got to stop the spread of communism so it doesn't go to Burma and India and Bangladesh. We've already seen it once, right? When the Nazis got kicked out here, we saw it spread to Eastern Europe. What if it spreads to Western Europe? So the Cold War, a conflict between two groups that does not involve direct fighting. Cold Warism. We don't really fight. This is not World War II. This is not World War I. This is the Cold War, which we may be in the Cold War today, where the two people that hate each other and fight each other don't actually fight hand to hand. League of Nations doesn't work after World War I, but the United Nations will work after World War II. It's basically every nation agrees to work together to prevent world wars. First example of the United Nations, remember the real version of the League of Nations that actually takes place after World War II, is the Korean War. North Korea will invade South Korea. After World War II, Korea split into North Korea and South Korea. North Korea on the side of the Soviets and the Chinese, and then South Korea on the sides of America. This country was liberated by the Allied powers from the kick the Japanese out. Well, after the war, the nations divided on the 38th parallel. Well, North Korea's like, screw this, and invades South Korea, tries to take over the entire nation. At that point, the United Nations, which is the America, England, France, the Soviet Union, China, it's every nation around the world joins in and says, no, we don't want another World War III. We're going to step in with our superpowers and stop this. They jump in and they push the North Koreans all the way back to China. At that point, China jumps in, pushes it all the way back down to here. They keep fighting. Eventually, it ends up right where it started, the 38th parallel. And today, the North Korea and South Korea are still divided along the 38th parallel. The North Korea version being totalitarian, autocratic, and communist, and the South Korean version being a democratic, capitalist nation. So we're back to where we started, but that's the first phase of the Korean War, a battle, a proxy war. Really, the real war here is you think North Korea versus South Korea, but the reality is, even though the United Nations got in, this is Soviet Union versus America. These are proxy wars. These are wars, a part of a Cold War where the Soviet Union never directly fights the United States, and the United States never directly fights the Soviet Union, but we sort of do here in North Korea versus South Korea. This is the first example in the 1950s. NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. NATO is an alliance. Oh no, we're bringing the alliances back. That worked out really well. World War I, yeah, I know. Is a Western democratic capitalistic alliance saying that if anyone attacks France, any of these blue countries are going to help each other out. If anyone attacks Germany, if anyone attacks England, if anyone attacks Spain, then these blue countries will all join together. So it's kind of like the United Nations. We're all going to work together, but this one's more specific towards the capitalist democratic nations. Are going to protect each other's backs against the communists, and the communist totalitarian autocratic nations are going to protect their backs against these Western capitalistic pigs. So NATO would be us, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Warsaw Pact, which is the Soviet Union's version of the same thing. So if anyone messes with these nations, then all these nations join in. Okay, you get it. Got it. Cool. When we sell goods, money comes in. Awesome. Yay! Sell more goods to more countries. We make more money. That'll produce more jobs, produce more goods. Well, the problem is, what if these nations turn to be Soviet Union nations? And all those sales will go bye-bye. And we've already seen these Eastern countries. What if England becomes communist? What if Spain becomes communist? We cannot remember, domino theory, we cannot allow communism to spread, because if communism spreads, it's going to hurt our bottom line. Less markets for us to sell to. We've got to stop it. So one of the ways to stop this is the Marshall Plan. And so, because these countries were bombed and blown up in World War II, they're in terrible shape. We've got to protect them. They're in a desperate situation. We've talked about before. When people and nations are in desperate situations, they'll look for extreme cures. They'll listen to extreme radical leaders. In desperate times, people will require radical measures. And one of those radical measures may be communism. Our nation's blown up. We're struggling. We're surviving. Maybe we go to communism. Well, we've got to prevent that. We have to protect these markets. We have to protect the idea that we think democracy is good for everyone. So America will lend money to all these nations to help them out. American banks will lend money to France, to England, to Germany, to Spain, to all these countries to prop them up, to keep them going so that they don't become communists. Basically, we say, hey, we'll give you money, but you need to remain democratic and you need to remain capitalist. A lot of people will applaud this. This is called the Marshall Plan of, wow, we saved Europe. This was a great investment. This was a great idea. Give them a bunch of money. This will help them out. The reality is this probably didn't work. Don't put this on the AP test. Do not put the Marshall Plan did not work on the AP test. But, so pause your mind thinking. Now let's step outside of the box and let's go back into the real world, swallow the red pill, and let's find out what really did happen, because this is non-conventional thinking, which is good. Do not always accept conventional wisdom. Do not always accept what you're being told. The reality is, if the government is flooding the economy with a bunch of money and the government is very much involved in all these economies, well, investors are spooked. Just like in the United States, the New Deal didn't work and the Great Depression lasted for over 10 years. The reason why was because investors were spooked. There was way too much government involvement. There was too much money being loaned to the government, and the government was propping up way too many businesses. All this money was loaned to this country, to France's government. And then France's government used that money to decide how to build the economy. All this money was loaned from U.S. banks to the English government. And then the English government decided where the money would go. Do you want to invest in a company? Do you want to start a company when you know that the English government's running everything? They may decide that your company is not important. They may not create certain laws. They may force you out of business. So you stay back and you wait to see the government pull back. And that's what happened here. We really see, and you can look at the data and you can look at the stats, you will see that people argue that, oh, the Marshall Plan relaunched the economy. The Marshall Plan giving this money to the European governments, and the European governments use that money to boost the economies. The reality is there isn't any increase. You can look at the GDPs, you can look at the real growth. What you'll find is once the European government said, all right, we're going to step back and let the businesses make the shops. We're going to let the private investors make the decisions. We're going to let the entrepreneurs start running the show. And as soon as these Western European countries took their government and stepped back away from the economy and stopped getting involved and allowed the businesses to run it, that's where you actually see the real growth. You can look at the data, and the data clearly shows that, hey, it wasn't the Marshall Plan that led to the growth in the economy. It did not shoot it up. While the Marshall Plan, while all this money was flooding into Europe, nothing was happening. So that makes you think, well, what happened? Well, as soon as the government regulation in these Western European countries, as they moved away from socialism, communism, from the war to a more free market, mixed economy, as they made that change, that's when the investment occurred. That's when the real growth occurred. Again, don't put that on test. You get in trouble. The AP wants you to always believe that the Marshall Plan saved Europe because, yay, big government is always your answer. Thanks, guys.